Okay, so first I'd like to give a big thank you to Adam and the LogicSense team for bringing us here today. Let's give them a round of applause. And I'm here from Vancouver, and I also just want to thank them for bringing me down here to get me out of the rain. Okay, so a couple of the the necessary words. Who's Ibica? As Ryan said, we're a pricing and customer value management platform designed for B2B SaaS. So we just focus on B2B SaaS and adjacent spaces. We do have extensive experience in the design of value models and how to base your pricing on the value that you're delivering to your customers. And what we do is we help our customers quantify and communicate value, optimize packaging and pricing to capture that value, and then maximize net revenue retention over the customer life cycle. I'm a co-founder and the CEO, and I've spent the last 15 years or so involved in pricing. So just a quick story. Some years ago, I was hired by a company called Monitor Group, which is a strategic consulting firm, now part of Deloitte, to come in as the Vice President of Online Solutions. I'd spent my career starting, scaling, growing, exiting SaaS companies, and I thought it would be good to sort of see what life was like on the other side of the table. So I went to this large strategic consulting firm, and they asked me to say, look at all the things we do, what should be taken online? So I looked at all sorts of things, behavioral market segmentation, scenario planning, some psychological stuff they did. But the thing that got me really excited, really excited, was pricing. Monitor had bought a company, the Strategic Pricing Group, which was run by a guy called Tom Nagel. For those of you involved in pricing, Tom Nagel is the godfather of pricing today. Most of the core ideas about pricing come from Tom. And I had a chance to work with him. And one of the things I learned was that your customer probably doesn't care what segment you think they're in. And your customer may or may not believe in your value propositions. But if you can't agree on a price, you don't actually have a customer. And pricing is this fantastically interesting area where all of these things come together. Psychology, mathematics, business models. I would encourage all of you to get as crazy about pricing as I am, and my friend Marcus Rivera. Marcus, put up your hand. We have one of the world's top pricing guys here with us, up from San Diego. It's just absolutely fascinating. Now, before we dive in, I think you need to know that I am incredibly bullish on generative AI. So everything I say is going to be skewed by my beliefs. But you may ask, why do I believe that? My wife asked me that recently. And I've got 2 points of personal evidence for this. One, at my little company, Ibica, the largest line in our IT budget this year was AI services. So we are spending more on AI services than we are on our CRM, on our accounting systems, on our marketing systems, or more than we spend on our search engine marketing. It's the largest cost item outside of people for our company. Now, you might be saying, as your finance director might have something to say about that. Well, yes, she does. But at the same time, generative AI has improved the productivity of our core business process, which is the building and quantification of value models, by 90%. We have cut the amount of human labor, and this is expensive human labor, people with PhDs in mathematics and MBAs and those sorts of people. We have cut that by 90%. So, I have good personal grounds for my optimism. But anyway, let's go on. What we're going to talk about today is how net revenue retention performance patterns are changing. And that second generation generative AI applications are starting to get market traction and are starting to change the benchmarks that we're seeing. Successful pricing and packaging patterns are also changing. And the evidence for these claims comes from the PeakSpan IBICA Net Revenue Retention Survey report, which is a major report that IBICA and PeakSpan just published. So what we're going to talk about is how generative AI is leading to new patterns, and that to take advantage of this, you're going to need to design in expansion revenue. Expansion revenue has always been important, but it is more important today than it was last year, according to our data. Designing that in will require usage-based pricing. I'm sure you're all tired of hearing about usage-based pricing at this point, but there's a reason this is the Usage Economy Summit. In order to take advantage of this, you'll need a billing management system like Logisense that is able to execute on these new pricing models, and that a new pricing process, which I'm calling generative pricing, is going to be needed to design this pricing. So let's talk a little bit more about this transformation in B2B SaaS. So the old model was to charge based on seats, to charge more for premium features and have your classic good, better, best GBB pricing, to pay reps on first-year bookings, to hand off customers to your customer success managers. Hopefully the S there is success, not support. And get customers to commit up front. And we are seeing a major change in how this works. People are pricing, the pricing metrics are based on units of work. You have to be really careful not to do anything that is going to gate or interfere with adoption. You want to pay reps for adoption. This is a big change for your sales reps, and will require some major cultural change and love and affection. Every team, every part of the company has to be part of customer success. And you need to invest in becoming predictable. So all of these changes are destabilizing many of the things that we thought were stable. But on the other hand, the technology to make predictions is getting better and better all the time. So where does the data I'm going to discuss come from? It comes from the PeakSpan IBICA Net Revenue Retention Survey Report for 2024. This is the second year we've done this survey together with PeakSpan. PeakSpan is a growth stage venture capital company based just south of us in one of those towns south of San Francisco. So I think San Mateo. I can't actually remember where they are. So the data comes from just over 500 B2B SaaS companies. It was collected between May and July of this year. And people were gathered from the PeakSpan and IBICA mailing lists and our LinkedIn connection. So this is a skewed data set. However, every data set anyone is going to present to you is also skewed. Now, there is no unskewed data. You can see here the distribution, the size distribution of the companies that responded to the report. So they are mostly between 5 million to 200 million, which is the sort of range of companies that IBICA largely serves, and that PeakSpan, they invest in the sort of 5 to 10 million area, and they hope that they're out of them by the time they get to 200 million. So it represents our biases. So also take that into account when you look at the data that I'm about to share. By the way, the report is available from the IBICA website for those who are interested. So one of the things that we do is we gather data by what we call SaaS vertical. And this is important because as someone running a company, you are expected to hit a certain NRR benchmark. These benchmarks are different not just by size of the company, but by the vertical of the company. So it's important when you're benchmarking net revenue retention to know what vertical you're talking about. Overall, net revenue retention has been edging up, driven by higher expansion revenue, but churn is also increasing. I want to pause there just to make sure you heard that. NRR is going up and churn is going up. This should cause red lights to flash, right? I was surprised when I saw this. And The diversity in performance, well, we only have 2 years of deep data, but there's definitely more diversity in performance this year. And the companies that relied just on user-based pricing had relatively poor net revenue retention. Pricing metrics are getting increasingly diverse, and one of the questions we ask is about who owns net revenue retention. Is it sales? Is it customer success? Is it, I hope not, finance? Or is it some combination? Or is there a dedicated team? And the companies that have a dedicated team responsible for NRR were significantly outperforming the others. Now, I know that this could be a correlation. Correlation doesn't imply causation, blah, blah, blah. But it's worth knowing. It could be that the people that are really focused on NRR have better NRR and have dedicated teams, but I think it's useful to know. And the other interesting thing here is that the general AI companies are far outperforming anyone else when it comes to net revenue retention. They are also the companies with the highest churn. We'll come back to that. Who has the lowest churn? So, not surprisingly, people selling to the government have the lowest churn. But useful to know, or useful to have our prejudices reinforced. Supply and logistics companies also have low churn. So does cybersecurity. You don't really want to rip out your cybersecurity solution. To our surprise here, though, infrastructure and CRM and general AI companies had relatively high churn. And I think that this sort of reflects the amount of change that's happening in the market. There's a lot of data in the report. If you like data, I encourage you to download it. One of the things that we do with all of our surveys is we run them through a clustering algorithm. So any clustering algorithm geeks here? Does the term laden, be proud, put your hand way up. Yeah. So this clustering was actually done using the Laden algorithm. We also ran it against k-means and fuzzy and a few other things, but I ended up using Laden. Really, really interesting. This is very different from last year. So it came up with 3 buckets. I named them. So one is conventional companies, and this was about a quarter of the survey respondents. These tend to be selling to B2B, small and medium enterprises. They tend to be using product-led growth as their main growth motion. They have a preference for tiered, good, better, best packaging patterns. They have the lowest NRR, and in fact, their net revenue retention on average was lower than 100%. Churn was, 5 to 6%. That's not terrible for selling to SMBs. Their priorities were to reduce downsell, reduce churn, and increase upsell. So if you think of it, their priorities are sort of negatives, right? What do I do to stop things from getting worse? Not what do I do to make things better? They largely had either sales or customer success responsible for net revenue retention. Another cluster, which I called enterprise, which was just over 30%, are selling primarily to enterprise. They use sales-led growth, no surprise there. We all know that product-led growth does not work for large enterprise sales. Their packaging patterns, they tended to have independent modules. So rather than relying on a tiered GBB system or a platform with extensions pattern, they lean towards having multiple independent modules. And this is important because that allows cross-sell. And cross-sell is one of the ways that you drive expansion revenue. NRR was higher, from about 103 to 107%. Good, but not a snowflake kind of number. Churn was a little bit higher than SMB, which surprised me. And their priorities are to increase cross-sell and to reduce churn. Again, no real surprise there. The interesting one was what I'm calling the emerging category. This was big. This was 40% of the respondents. There's no commonality in what market they're targeting. They're all over the place. They lean towards relying on sales-led growth. But there were a couple of really well-performing companies that used community-led growth. And community-led growth is the growth motion where you build a community and you rely on the community to do the selling for you. And one of the big, exciting examples of this right now is Hugging Face. How many people here know the company Hugging Face? Fantastic. Those of you who don't know, go and take a look at this. For people who think that generative AI is based on large language models by 4 or 5 companies, anyone want to guess how many models live on Hugging Face today? Come on, wild guess. Do a swag, scientific wild ass guess. 1,200? No, it's a lot more than that. It is over 1 million. Now, granted, most of those models are probably garbage. But, you didn't hear me say that though. Still, that's 1 million freaking models. 3 of them I built for my own exploratory purposes. These companies, the other really interesting thing in here is that the NRR was bimodal. For the conventional and enterprise, we had, I won't call them, they weren't standard distributions, but they were, they only had one peak. Having looked at a lot of data, I've never seen a standard distribution in my life. But it's really important to know if a distribution skews to the left, skews to the right, does it have fat tails, or if it's bimodal. And this emerging one had bimodal distribution for NRR. Super interesting. And all of the top performing companies were in this emerging group. So what does that mean? So here's the company that had the best net revenue retention. So it's, it expects to have an NRR of 230%. That's pretty freaking astonishing. I'm not sure if this is true. That's better than any number I can remember Snowflake reporting. I'm not saying it's better than any Snowflake number, but it's better than any I remember them reporting. It's in the machine-to-machine space, which is an emerging model that we'll hear more and more about it over the time to come. How many people here have experimented with using AI SDR or artificial intelligence-based SDRs? Great. So we experimented. It wasn't very successful for us. But think, if you have someone selling through AI, you are also going to have people buying through AIs. More and more of procurement teams are going to be relying on AI to actually make the procurement decision. These sorts of M2M models are still very, this is a tiny part of the market today, but it's growing fast. Now, normally, when I see a company with a 10% churn, that's close to, I wouldn't say it's wild red flags, but you'd be concerned, right? If you had 10% churn. If I was an investor in a company and they had 10% churn, I'd say get on top of that, figure that out, help us understand why your churn is at 10%. But this company is blowing it out of the water. And there are a few companies that we saw that had much higher churn, 20% churn. Normally, if I saw a company with 20% churn, I'd be saying, stop everything, let's fix that. But there are companies out there now with high churn and high NRR. When I saw this, I thought, what is happening? I think I understand it. Well, probably wrong, but here's my interpretation. That there are a group of companies, primarily in generative AI, that are casting a wide net. And they're taking in a lot of new customers. A large number of those customers are not getting value and they're churning out. But enough companies are getting exceptional value to grow quickly. Now, Marcus and I were talking about this over lunch. Is this a blip in the data? Is this something that just reflects the fact that the market is changing and this will normalize over the next 3 to 5 years? By the way, I say that that's what I think it is in the report. That I think that this is a blip and it will normalize over time. But the more I think about it, the more people I talk to, I'm not sure if I'm right. It may be that this is a pattern that that's going to be well established, and it will become its own strategy. I don't know. Maybe. Hopefully we'll talk about this again next year and the year after. The company with the worst NRR had high churn and very little expansion revenue. The thing to notice here, two things to notice here. One is it's relying on per user pricing. Most, not all, but many of the poorly performing companies are heavily reliant on per user pricing. But surprisingly for me, MarTech, marketing technology as a SaaS vertical, underperformed this year, which really surprised me because you hear a lot of stuff happening in MarTech. I don't know why it underperformed. My hypothesis is that there's so much talk happening that buyers are hesitating. That right now buyers are confused. They don't know what they should do, so they are hesitating on making major investments. Kind of hope that I'm right and that MarTech will come back, but we'll see. The most common pricing metrics. This frustrates me we ask this question in different surveys, and all the time, per user pricing is the most common SaaS pricing metric. How long have Marcos and Kyle Poyer and myself been telling people that this has got to change? There's a reason I have my hair's all gray and it's getting thin. But on the positive side, there is growing use of value metrics, and most companies use some combination of user-based pricing and usage-based pricing or one of the other pricing metrics. There are fewer and fewer companies every year that only have user-based pricings, and those companies are struggling. The other one you might notice here that is you may say is kind of weird is AI associated. So there are a number of pricing metrics that are heavily associated with artificial intelligence, tokens. For this data, it's based on just questions about input tokens and output tokens. Ibica is doing a major survey right now specifically on generative AI and AI monetization, and we've added reasoning tokens. OpenAI's O1 actually charges you for hidden reasoning tokens. We could have a whole conversation about that. Outcome-based pricing, for all the talk that we like to have about it, is still relatively rare. And I think it's rare for two reasons. One is, in order to have outcome-based pricings, one is you have to have very clear outcomes, which not everything has really clear outcomes. And secondly, you have to be able to attribute the outcome clearly. Too many of the outcomes that people claim, success has many mothers, but failure has just preferably not. Failure is an orphan. So in order to get to outcome-based pricing, you have to have clear outcomes and clear attribution. Now, for those of you who are real geeks, you'll say, but I can use causal ML to figure out what the outcomes are. I'm sure you can. We do it all the time in healthcare. But let's face it, B2B enterprise does not do the kind of data collection and analysis that healthcare does. We are rank amateurs when it comes to this. So, a couple of key takeaways. Companies that rely on per user pricing only have 6% lower NRR on average. And companies using pricing metrics associated with AI have 11% higher NRR on average. The world is shifting. Just a few things on packaging patterns. I'm going to blow through this quickly, but Ibica organized this pricing around packaging. We've identified some common packaging patterns. The interesting thing here is that there were a few people, not a lot, maybe 10 out of 500, who in the other column put agents. So we are seeing the surfacing of agent-based pricing and agent-based packaging. I'll let you download the deck and go through this in detail, but their packaging patterns are associated with NRR performance. The sort of key takeaways that I want to give you, I'm going to try and go fast so that people can ask questions, there's really three ways that you generate expansion revenue: growth and package, cross-sell, and upsell. So your pricing and packaging needs to enable those. That should be one of your design criteria when you're looking at your packaging and pricing. Do you enable growth in packages, cross-sell, or upsell? And if you don't, it's probably time to rethink your packaging. Ibica strongly believes that price should be based on the value to customer, the value that you're delivering. And people often ask, how do you do that? Well, that's a whole long thing. I would love to have that conversation with you. But the simple answer is you need to have value models and pricing models, and increasingly today cost models because of the compute cost for AI. You build these models, and a model is really just a system of equations, and equations have variables in them. And then you look at the connections between the variables in your different models, and you look to see which variables show up in all models, and then you run some simulations to understand how these co-vary with each other, and that gives you the information that you need in order to really design pricing that will scale with value. Now that's all well and good. I've designed a lot of packaging and pricing models, and one of the things that I discovered is that I could design a really freaking brilliant packaging and pricing system, and the billing system could not implement it. Anyone ever had that experience? Put up your hands, come on. Almost everyone, right? That's probably one of the reasons why you're here today. You need to have a billing management system that can implement flexible packaging. And I would argue that we're also moving towards dynamic configuration, where packages are not predefined. They are dynamically generated by what will give the most value to this customer in this context at this point in time, and that they can be changed. Your billing management system has to be able to support multiple pricing metrics, and be able to create composite pricing metrics that combine several different metrics together. And then it needs to be able to integrate with your other applications. So these are the sort of things that I would be looking for if I was choosing a billing management system, and I'm sure that LogiSense has some things to say about that. Just very quickly, what's happening, I think, at the center of pricing practice and discipline is that AI is changing cost dynamics. I was talking with a friend of mine, Dick Sobel, who mostly works with manufacturing companies. And I said, yeah, we're seeing a lot more pressure on costs and the need to understand cost dynamics as part of pricing. And he goes, oh yeah? You mean you guys didn't care about costs in the past? But let's face it, B2B SaaS companies more or less ignored most of their costs. Because margins were so freaking high, we didn't have to worry about costs. That is changing. I know that B2B SaaS was a bit of a fantasy land for the last 15 years or so, but reality is hitting hard. And higher operating costs are going to have a big impact on how SaaS companies get on valuation, on how you design your operations. This is a big, and it's going to be quite a traumatic change for a lot of companies. Also, these second-generation generative AI apps have new properties. They're composable, they're conversational, they're integrative, they use synthetic users and synthetic data. They have very different properties than conventional applications. This is a bit of an eye chart, so I'll just ask people who are interested to take a look at it later. But what we're really seeing is that we need a new approach to pricing. The conventional approaches don't work, and what I think is going to work going forward is a mashup of dynamic pricing and value-based pricing. What the conventional heavy metal pricing vendors, the Prozas, the Zilliants, the Vendavos, PriceFX, these guys are dynamic pricing. Once one of them was up on the stage and he was saying, in 3 years, all pricing will be dynamic pricing. And I said, great. Does that mean when I buy your fancy revenue management pricing optimization system that you're going to give me dynamic pricing? Of course not. But I think that world is changing, and that we can actually create a fusion of dynamic pricing and value-based pricing for what I'm calling generative pricing. Customer-centric flexibility, model-driven value optimization, personalized value stories, real-time adjustments, and multi-factor differentiation. I know that's a bunch of gobbledygook, but each of those terms actually means a very specific thing, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it. I just want to end by remembering that it's, at the end of the day, value is what matters. How are we creating value for our customers? Who are we creating value for? How are we communicating it? How are we documenting it? And then only after we understand all those things, how are we going to capture it in price? Thank you. Happy to take questions. I'm sure that they will come and pull me off when the time is up, but hopefully we have time for a couple of questions. Come on, go.
Will you recommend the real-time adjusting pricing? Is that like a bid?
Yeah, so this is basically what dynamic pricing does, right? Dynamic pricing engines, which come out of revenue and load management for airlines. That's the origins of a lot of this stuff. Change pricing dynamically. I'm talking about something quite different. Let's take an example from the financial sector. So one of the key inputs to a lot of value models in the financial sector is interest rates. So as interest rates change, the value of different financial software solutions changes. I think we are getting to a point where we are sophisticated enough to change our price based on changes on input factors that change how much value is being delivered, and that SaaS companies are going to have to be willing to suck it up and, in some cases, lower prices in response to market changes. I know CFOs and analysts are going to hate that, but you can't have your cake and eat it too. If you're going to have pricing that always goes up but never comes down, it's like gas prices, right? It's not fair. And one of the core principles of value-based pricing is that it has to be fair. So yes, I think that we are moving towards a world, maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but we are moving towards a world in which pricing will get adjusted much more frequently depending on the value being delivered. At the back.
One of the challenges that comes up, right, is as you do dynamic pricing and change pricing, maybe it's different for new customers because you have to hang on to lower pricing for older customers. It's not really easy to.
Yeah, I'll just repeat the question. So these new pricing models are all very good, and maybe they're good for new customers, but what do you do with your installed base? Do you know why God was able to create the world in 7 days? He had no installed base. So this issue of how do you migrate your existing customers into new pricing models is not easy. Actually, about 20% of Ibica's work concerns precisely this problem. I'll just say that if you fail to do this, it's like rowing your boat with a big wet blanket hanging off the rear. So it's incredibly important. It's not easy. It's the subject of its own talk. We have a methodology that we apply. It's not always 100% successful. And again, CFOs hate it when I say this. One of the keys to success is to recognize under the new pricing model, some people are going to pay less, and you should suck it up and let them pay less. Too often I run into situations where they say, well, we're going to charge more for the people that get, the new pricing model. If people are going to pay more, we're going to charge them more. But if they're going to pay less, we're just going to ignore that. That does not lead to fairness in pricing. See?
So with the pricing, a big question is about brand perception, brand creation, right? And it has to do with a lot of the psychological pricing. So how do you, integrate that in the ecosystem that you show?
Yeah. So the question was, a lot of pricing is psychological, and one has to factor the psychological pieces in to your pricing strategy. How do you do that? Because that was not addressed anywhere in this presentation. Good catch. My partner in crime, Karen Chang, will send you a thank you note later because she often calls me out on this. Again, we have a formal methodology for understanding the emotional and psychological parts of pricing. We have not fully integrated them into our platform or processes as well as we should. So you're right. I will say though that I really hate it when pricing experts try to use psychological tricks to trick people. And there are people out there who do that. And again, I think that actually hurts our reputation. It doesn't help it. And the other thing is, so the psychological elements of pricing are sometimes caught into the notion of behavioral pricing from behavioral economics, Tversky and those guys. And some of that is really important. But let me give you an example. So prospect theory says that people would rather avoid a loss than get a gain. That's part of prospect theory. And that people are risk adverse. Now that is, according to their data, that's true. But that's average data. And I can tell you that there are people, and it's the people who start companies, that are happy to take the risk in order to the gain. I don't think I think prospect theory does not describe a universal human behavior. So I think we have to be careful with this stuff. There's more subtlety than is sometimes acknowledged.
What is the legality aspect of the risk exposure that we have for pricing? If we do some changes of the prices and no other ones, so it's not equal. There is some legality into pricing contracts.
It depends on your contract. So another thing that you need to do when you first undertake a pricing transformation is read the existing contracts. Some existing contracts have a most favored nation clause in them, and that can really blow up, it can constrain what you're able to do. And if you have a lot of MFN clauses in your contracts, you're going to have to figure out what you want to do about those and how that is going to constrain your pricing. It's just as big an issue actually as what the billing management system can support. And there's other issues that come up as well. Pricing and packaging has a big impact on revenue recognition. So another thing that you have to look at when you're designing new pricing is how is this going to impact revenue recognition? You can blow up a company's valuation if you screw up revenue recognition. And in fact, I'm not going to name the company, but there's a major SaaS company in the educational space. And this is about a decade ago now, I think, that got into trouble for revenue recognition. And it got to the point where its auditor would not certify its books because of revenue recognition issues, and it was delisted. It had been trading at about $7 billion. It was bought by private equity for about $1 billion. So investors lost $6 billion in value because of a revenue recognition issue. So most favored nation clauses, other contractual issues, but also RevRec is critical to think about when you're doing pricing. Am I getting the hook yet? Time for one more question. At the back. Yeah. Yeah.
great presentation. I was trying to understand there's so many complexity behind. There's a science behind building the pricing, but sometimes it's so difficult for end consumer customers to understand the pricing and really what value they're getting from, and when it's really the value they're paying for. What is your feedback?
Well, I think so. So first of all, most B2B SaaS companies that say they are doing value-based pricing are not. And the heavy metal, old school pricing revenue, the revenue management companies claim that they are helping you price on value. They are not. They are estimating willingness to pay, and willingness to pay is not the same thing as value. So how do you do value-based pricing? It's not actually that difficult. You need to, one, build a value model. You need to validate that value model with real customers, both through qualitative interviews and through quantitative analysis. You need to, on an ongoing basis, capture the data about how you're creating value, and that's more and more possible to do because our solutions these days are much better instrumented than they were 10, 15 years ago. So it is increasingly possible to actually understand how much value you are creating for a customer and how that's changing over time. That's another whole issue, is how value delivery changes over time, and what to do about companies like cybersecurity, where the value is in a sense sort of like insurance. Like how would a cybersecurity do outcome-based pricing when the outcome is that nothing happens? So there's lots of nuance here, but I think that, first of all, B2B SaaS has sucked at value-based pricing and has not been well supported by the companies that should be supporting them. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of people out there that will say, oh, value, that's willingness to pay. No, it's not. Willingness to pay is shaped by value. It's an outcome. I'm sorry, I'm not doing a great job of answering your question, but... Okay. How are we doing for time? 3:08. I'm sure I'm over time. So I just want to thank you all. I'm happy to have more conversations about this. I'm easy to find. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Stephen with a V fourth, or email me, stephen@ibica.com, and I am always interested in understanding how people are approaching packaging and pricing, what's changing, and learning from each other. We're building a community here. Let's share and learn from each other. Thank you.